Last Saturday afternoon at the exclusive Riverside Country Club, my son Christopher introduced me to his wealthy friends as quote-unquote the help, claiming I was just the maintenance worker who had come to fix something in the clubhouse, apparently too ashamed of his blue-collar father to acknowledge our actual relationship in front of people he wanted to impress with his sophisticated lifestyle and his carefully constructed upper-class persona. When I heard my own son deny our blood relationship and dismiss me as hired help in front of a room full of pretentious socialites, I stood up from where I had been quietly eating my lunch and announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that I was donating Christopher's entire inheritance, which totaled $47 million, to various charities rather than leaving it to someone who was ashamed to call me his father. I'm Robert Mitchell. I'm 71 years old, and this is the story of how my successful son's embarrassment about my working-class background cost him a fortune that I had spent 40 years building specifically to provide security and opportunities for my family, and how his arrogance and social climbing ultimately led to the most expensive mistake of his privileged life. Before we dive into this incredible tale of family betrayal, social pretensions, and the ultimate price of denying your roots, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what part of the country you're listening from today. The foundation of this story begins 45 years ago when I was a 26-year-old construction worker in Detroit, Michigan, working 16-hour days on commercial building projects and saving every penny I could to build a better life for my wife Sandra and our newborn son Christopher, who represented all my hopes and dreams for breaking the cycle of poverty that had defined my own childhood in the working-class neighborhoods of Southwest Detroit. I had grown up in a family where my father worked in the auto plants and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in the suburbs, and I was determined that my son would have opportunities and advantages that I had never been able to access, including the best education, exposure to different cultures and ideas, and the financial security that would allow him to pursue his passions without worrying about money. From the moment Christopher was born, Sandra and I made sacrifices to ensure that he would have every possible advantage, including moving to better neighborhoods with superior schools, paying for private tutoring and enrichment programs, and saving aggressively to build a college fund that would allow him to attend any university he chose without accumulating student debt. I worked construction during the day and took on side jobs in the evenings and weekends, doing everything from home repairs and landscaping to small renovation projects, reinvesting every dollar I earned into real estate purchases and business ventures that would eventually provide passive income and long-term wealth accumulation. The construction industry in Detroit during the 1970s and 80s provided numerous opportunities for ambitious workers who were willing to take risks and work harder than their competitors, and I gradually transitioned from being an employee to becoming a contractor with my own crew and my own projects. By the time Christopher was 10 years old, I owned a successful construction company that specialized in commercial and industrial projects, and I had begun investing in real estate development opportunities that would eventually make me one of the wealthiest contractors in the Detroit metropolitan area. Sandra and I made sure that Christopher understood the value of hard work and the importance of treating all people with respect regardless of their economic status or social position, and we expected him to appreciate the sacrifices we were making to provide him with opportunities that most children in our community could never access. Christopher excelled academically throughout elementary and high school, earning top grades and participating in numerous extracurricular activities that would strengthen his college applications and broaden his understanding of the world beyond our blue-collar community. We enrolled Christopher in private schools, where he was exposed to children from wealthy families, hoping that this experience would provide him with valuable connections and social skills, while also teaching him to navigate different social environments with confidence and authenticity. Christopher's academic achievements earned him admission to prestigious universities, and he ultimately chose to attend Harvard Business School, where he would study finance and develop the sophisticated analytical skills that would serve him well in the corporate world. Sandra and I were incredibly proud of Christopher's acceptance to Harvard, seeing it as validation of our sacrifices and our commitment to providing him with the best possible education. And we gladly paid the substantial tuition and living expenses without expecting any financial contribution from Christopher himself. During Christopher's college years, he began to change in ways that concerned Sandra and me, becoming increasingly focused on social status and material possessions rather than on the values of hard work, integrity, and family loyalty that we had tried to instill in him throughout his childhood and adolescence. Christopher started making comments about his classmates' families and their wealth, expressing embarrassment about our working-class background, and suggesting that we didn't understand the sophisticated world he was entering through his education and his new social connections. When Christopher brought college friends home for visits, he seemed uncomfortable about our modest house and our straightforward lifestyle, and he began making excuses for our lack of sophistication and our unfamiliarity with the cultural references and social customs that were important to his wealthy classmates. Sandra and I tried to address Christopher's growing snobbery by reminding him of our family values and the importance of staying connected to his roots. But our conversations often devolved into arguments about social class, education, and what Christopher saw as our limitations and narrow perspectives. After graduating from Harvard, Christopher landed a prestigious job with a major investment banking firm in New York City, where he quickly established himself as a talented analyst and began earning a substantial salary that allowed him to rent an expensive apartment and adopt a lifestyle that matched his professional ambitions. Christopher's success in the financial industry was gratifying for Sandra and me, because it represented the fulfillment of our dreams for his education and career advancement. But we were troubled by his increasing distance from our family and his apparent embarrassment about his working-class origins. During Christopher's visits home, which became increasingly infrequent as his career advanced, he would make subtle and not-so-subtle comments about our lack of sophistication, our simple tastes, and our failure to understand the complexities of his professional and social world. Christopher began dating women from wealthy families and attending exclusive social events where his background and his parents' occupations were sources of embarrassment rather than pride, and he started requesting that we not mention our work or our lifestyle when we met his friends or colleagues. Sandra was particularly hurt by Christopher's attitude toward our family, because she had worked as a secretary and bookkeeper for my construction company, while also managing our household and supporting Christopher's education, and she felt that her contributions were being dismissed and devalued by our son's new social consciousness. I tried to maintain patience with Christopher's evolving attitudes, reminding myself that his education and career success were exactly what Sandra and I had worked to achieve. But I was frustrated by his apparent inability to appreciate the sacrifices we had made and the love that had motivated our efforts on his behalf. Over the years, Christopher's financial success continued to grow as he advanced within the investment banking industry and eventually started his own private equity firm, accumulating wealth and social connections that placed him firmly within the upper echelons of New York society. Christopher married Stephanie, a woman from a prominent family whose father was a federal judge and whose mother was involved in numerous charitable organizations that provided access to influential social circles and cultural institutions. Stephanie's family background and social connections were clearly important to Christopher, and he seemed to view his marriage as another step in his transformation from working-class origins to upper-class respectability and social acceptance. Sandra and I were invited to Christopher and Stephanie's wedding, which was held at an exclusive country club with hundreds of guests from the worlds of finance, law, and politics. But we felt uncomfortable and out of place among people who seemed to view us as curiosities rather than as the proud parents of the groom. During the wedding reception, Christopher introduced us to various guests in ways that minimized our backgrounds and emphasized our son's achievements, rather than acknowledging the family foundation that had made his success possible. Sandra and I tried to enjoy the celebration and to focus on our happiness for Christopher's marriage and success, but we were hurt by the subtle ways that he seemed to distance himself from us and to present us as peripheral figures in his life, rather than as the people who had made his achievements possible. After the wedding, Christopher and Stephanie settled into a lifestyle that included multiple homes, expensive vacations, exclusive club memberships, and participation in high-society charitable events and social gatherings, where their wealth and status were displayed and celebrated. Christopher's communication with Sandra and me became increasingly sporadic and superficial, limited to brief phone calls on holidays and birthdays, with very few visits to Detroit and even fewer invitations for us to visit them in New York or at their vacation properties. When Sandra was diagnosed with cancer 3 years after Christopher's wedding, he expressed appropriate concern and offered to help with medical expenses, but his actual presence and support during her illness were minimal, apparently because his business commitments and social obligations took priority over family responsibilities. Sandra's battle with cancer lasted 18 months and required extensive treatment and care that I provided while also managing my construction business and dealing with my own grief and stress over her deteriorating condition. Christopher visited Sandra twice during her illness, both times briefly, and with apparent discomfort about the medical environment and the emotional intensity of dealing with his mother's suffering and gradual decline. Sandra died on a Tuesday morning in October, with me holding her hand and Christopher participating by phone from a business meeting in London, where he was negotiating a major acquisition deal that he claimed he couldn't postpone even for his mother's final moments. Christopher's absence during Sandra's death was devastating for me, not only because of my grief over losing my wife of 45 years, but also because of my disappointment and anger over my son's priorities and his apparent inability to recognize the importance of family obligations over business opportunities. Christopher returned for Sandra's funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people from our community who had known and loved Sandra for decades. But he seemed uncomfortable with the working-class nature of the service and the straightforward expressions of grief and appreciation from people who didn't share his sophisticated sensibilities. During the reception after Sandra's funeral, Christopher made comments to some of his business associates who had attended the service about the simple nature of our community and the differences between our lifestyle and the more refined environments he was accustomed to in his professional and social circles. I overheard Christopher's remarks about our community and our funeral arrangements, and I was shocked and hurt by his continued inability to show respect for the people and the values that had shaped his early life and had provided the foundation for his later success. After Sandra's death, Christopher's relationship with me became even more distant and superficial, limited to occasional phone calls and holiday cards, with no invitations to visit his homes or to participate in his family celebrations and social activities. Christopher and Stephanie had 2 children, my grandchildren Emily and Michael, who were 8 and 6 years old respectively. But I rarely saw them because Christopher apparently didn't want his children to be exposed to their grandfather's working-class background and simple lifestyle. The few times I did see my grandchildren, they seemed polite but distant, clearly having been taught to view me as a somewhat embarrassing relative rather than as someone who loved them and wanted to be involved in their lives. Christopher's efforts to distance his children from me were particularly painful because I had hoped to have the kind of close relationship with my grandchildren that I had enjoyed with my own grandfather, who had been a source of wisdom, stories, and unconditional love during my childhood. I continued to build my construction and real estate businesses after Sandra's death, partly as a way of dealing with my grief and partly because I wanted to ensure that Christopher and his family would have substantial financial security, regardless of his attitude toward me and our relationship. By the time I reached 70 years old, my business empire was worth approximately $47 million, including commercial real estate properties, residential developments, construction equipment, and investment portfolios that generated substantial passive income. I had always planned to leave my wealth to Christopher and his children, viewing it as the culmination of a lifetime of work and sacrifice that would provide them with opportunities and security for generations to come. Despite Christopher's attitude toward me and his embarrassment about our family background, I continued to love him and to hope that maturity and perspective would eventually help him appreciate the values and the sacrifices that had made his success possible. I had prepared estate planning documents that would transfer my entire fortune to Christopher upon my death, with provisions for my grandchildren's education and future needs, because I believed that family obligations transcended personal disappointments, and that my wealth should benefit my descendants regardless of our relationship challenges. The turning point in my relationship with Christopher came last spring when he invited me to join him for lunch at the Riverside Country Club, which I assumed was an opportunity for us to spend time together and perhaps to improve our relationship after years of distance and superficial communication. I was hopeful that Christopher's invitation represented a recognition of my advancing age and a desire to rebuild our relationship before it was too late, and I looked forward to having an honest conversation about our family and our future. When I arrived at the country club, which was an impressive facility with manicured golf courses, elegant dining rooms, and an atmosphere of wealth and exclusivity that I had never experienced in my working-class life, I was struck by the beauty of the surroundings and the obvious privilege that membership represented. Christopher met me at the entrance and seemed nervous or uncomfortable as he guided me through the club's facilities toward the dining room where we would have lunch, making comments about the club's rules and expectations that suggested he was concerned about my ability to fit in with the environment and the other members. The dining room was filled with well-dressed people who were clearly wealthy and sophisticated, engaging in conversations about business deals, vacation plans, charitable activities, and social events that reflected their privileged lifestyles and their connections to influential circles in politics, finance, and culture. Christopher and I were seated at a table near the center of the dining room, and I noticed that several people approached our table to greet Christopher and to be introduced to his guest, providing an opportunity for social interaction that I assumed would include normal introductions between a successful man and his proud father. The first group of people who approached our table included two couples who were apparently close friends of Christopher and Stephanie, and I expected Christopher to introduce me as his father and to engage in the kind of casual conversation that typically occurs when family members meet their relatives' friends in social settings. Instead, Christopher's introduction shocked me to my core and revealed the depth of his embarrassment about our relationship and his complete lack of respect for my role in his life and his success. "This is Bob," Christopher said with a casual tone that immediately excluded me from the social circle and established me as someone of lower status. "He's here to take a look at some maintenance issues we've been having in the clubhouse." Christopher's introduction of me as a maintenance worker rather than as his father was so unexpected and so hurtful that I initially didn't understand what was happening, or why he would say something so completely false and so deliberately insulting. The couples nodded politely and made brief small talk about the club's facilities and the importance of maintaining the property's high standards, treating me as hired help rather than as Christopher's family member, while Christopher played along with the deception and discussed the supposed maintenance problems that had brought me to the club. I sat in stunned silence as Christopher continued the charade, providing details about fictional plumbing issues and electrical problems that needed to be addressed, while his friends offered suggestions about contractors and service providers they had used for similar work at their own properties. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Christopher maintaining the fiction that I was a worker rather than his father, and I realized that this wasn't a spontaneous mistake or a moment of confusion, but rather a deliberate and calculated decision to deny our relationship in order to avoid embarrassment in front of his wealthy friends. When the couples moved on to their own table, I confronted Christopher about his introduction and demanded an explanation for why he had identified me as maintenance staff rather than acknowledging me as his father. "Dad, you have to understand," Christopher said in a low voice, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation but apparently committed to justifying his behavior. "These people move in very different circles, and they wouldn't understand our background or appreciate the differences in our lifestyles and experiences." Christopher explained that his social and professional relationships were built on shared experiences and common cultural references that I wouldn't understand, and that introducing me as his father would create awkward conversations and uncomfortable questions about our family history and background. "It's easier for everyone if we just keep things simple," Christopher continued. "And besides, you don't really fit in with this crowd anyway, so why make it complicated by getting into family relationships and personal history that nobody really needs to know about?" Christopher's explanation revealed that his denial of our relationship wasn't an impulsive decision, but rather a calculated strategy for managing his social image and avoiding the embarrassment he associated with acknowledging his working-class origins and his father's blue-collar background. I was devastated by Christopher's attitude and his willingness to sacrifice our relationship for the sake of social acceptance among people who apparently judged others based on their economic status and their cultural sophistication rather than on their character and their achievements. "So you're ashamed of me," I said, struggling to control my emotions as I processed the full implications of Christopher's behavior and his casual willingness to deny our family connection. Christopher's response was defensive rather than apologetic, as he claimed that shame wasn't the right word and that he was simply being practical about social dynamics and the realities of navigating different cultural environments with different expectations and standards. "It's not about shame," Christopher insisted. "It's about fitting in and maintaining relationships that are important for my business and my family's future, and introducing complications that don't serve any useful purpose. Christopher's characterization of our father-son relationship as a complication that didn't serve any useful purpose was perhaps the most hurtful thing he could have said, because it revealed how completely he had rejected the values and the love that had motivated everything Sandra and I had done for him throughout his life. As we continued our lunch, I observed Christopher's interactions with other club members and began to understand the extent to which he had constructed a false identity that excluded his actual family history and background in favor of a more socially acceptable narrative about his origins and his path to success. Christopher seemed completely comfortable with his deception and showed no signs of guilt or discomfort about denying his relationship with the man who had worked for 40 years to provide him with the opportunities that had made his current lifestyle possible. I realized that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a pattern of behavior that reflected Christopher's fundamental rejection of his family and his complete absorption into a social world that valued appearance and status over authenticity and loyalty. The final straw came when a larger group of club members approached our table, including several prominent businessmen and their wives who were apparently interested in meeting Christopher's guest and learning more about the maintenance work that was supposedly being discussed. Christopher once again introduced me as Bob the maintenance worker, and this time he elaborated on the fiction by describing specific problems with the club's heating system and plumbing that required expert attention and professional repair services. The group engaged in an extended conversation about property maintenance and the challenges of maintaining older buildings, treating me as a hired contractor and asking technical questions about repair strategies and cost estimates for various types of maintenance work. Christopher not only maintained the deception, but actually seemed to enjoy the performance, providing detailed responses to questions about maintenance issues and discussing timelines and procedures for addressing the fictional problems he had invented. I realized that Christopher was not only ashamed of our relationship, but was actually entertaining himself and his friends by making me participate in an elaborate charade that reinforced their sense of superiority and their assumptions about social class and professional status. The conversation continued for nearly 15 minutes, with Christopher's friends offering advice about maintenance contractors and sharing stories about their own experiences with property repairs and renovations, while I sat silently and watched my son perform for an audience that had no idea they were witnessing a man deny his own father. When the group finally moved on to their own activities, I had reached my breaking point and was ready to respond to Christopher's betrayal in a way that would make him understand the consequences of his choices and his complete lack of respect for our family relationship. "Christopher," I said in a voice that was loud enough to be heard by nearby tables, "I want you to know that I've made a decision about my estate planning that I think you should hear about right now." Christopher's expression immediately changed from casual confidence to concern and confusion as he realized that I was about to say something that might disrupt his carefully managed social environment and potentially embarrass him in front of the club members he was trying to impress. "I have spent 40 years building a business empire worth $47 million, I announced, speaking clearly and loudly enough for everyone in the immediate area to hear, and I had planned to leave all of that money to my son Christopher and his children when I die. The nearby tables began to pay attention to our conversation as I continued with my announcement, and Christopher's face went pale as he realized that I was about to reveal information that would contradict everything he had told his friends about our relationship and my role in his life. "However," I continued, standing up from my chair to ensure that my words would carry throughout the dining room. I have decided that I cannot leave my fortune to someone who is ashamed to call me his father, and who introduces me to his friends as hired help, rather than acknowledging the man who made his success possible. The dining room fell silent as club members realized they were witnessing a dramatic family confrontation, and Christopher's face showed panic and embarrassment as he understood that his deception was being exposed in front of everyone he had been trying to impress. Christopher has just spent the last hour telling all of you that I'm a maintenance worker here to fix problems in the clubhouse, I announced to the room. But the truth is that I'm his father, and I'm the man who worked 16 hours a day for 40 years to pay for his Harvard education and to build the wealth that he has been expecting to inherit. The revelation that Christopher had been lying about our relationship created a buzz of conversation and obvious discomfort among the club members, who were clearly shocked by the dramatic turn of events and by the implications of Christopher's deception. Since Christopher is apparently too ashamed of his blue-collar father to acknowledge our relationship in public, I continued, I am announcing that I will be donating his entire inheritance to charities that help working-class families send their children to college, because those families understand the value of hard work and the importance of family loyalty. Christopher's attempts to interrupt my announcement and to minimize the situation were unsuccessful, as I continued to explain the details of my decision and the reasons behind my choice to disinherit him in favor of charitable organizations that would appreciate the value of the money I had earned through decades of hard work. The Christopher Mitchell Scholarship Foundation will provide college funding for children of construction workers, factory employees, and other blue-collar families, I announced, and it will be named after my son as a reminder that education and opportunity should be valued rather than used as excuses for abandoning your family and your roots. The impact of my announcement on Christopher was immediate and devastating, as he realized that his moment of social embarrassment had cost him $47 million and had destroyed the financial security he had taken for granted throughout his adult life. Christopher's friends and fellow club members were clearly uncomfortable with the dramatic scene that was unfolding, and many of them began to leave the dining room or to move to tables farther away from our location, apparently wanting to avoid being associated with the controversy and embarrassment. "Dad, please," Christopher said desperately. "You can't be serious about this. You're just upset about a misunderstanding, and we can work this out privately without involving all these people or making permanent decisions about your estate." Christopher's sudden use of the word dad, after spending an hour denying our relationship, was particularly ironic and revealed that he understood the significance of what he had lost through his arrogance and his social pretensions. I explained to Christopher that there was no misunderstanding about what had happened, and that his willingness to deny our relationship in order to maintain his social image had revealed his true character and his complete lack of appreciation for the sacrifices that had made his lifestyle possible. "You've made it clear that you're ashamed of your father and your background," I told Christopher as I prepared to leave the club. "So I'm making sure that my money goes to people who would be proud to have a working-class father and who understand the value of family loyalty." Christopher's desperate attempts to apologize and to explain his behavior were too little and too late, because his actions had revealed fundamental character flaws that couldn't be excused or corrected through simple apologies or promises to behave differently in the future. I walked out of the Riverside Country Club with my head held high, knowing that I had made the right decision about my estate and that Christopher's arrogance and social climbing had cost him the fortune that I had spent a lifetime building for his benefit. The story of my confrontation with Christopher at the country club spread quickly through both his social circles and my business community, creating significant embarrassment for Christopher and validation for my decision to disinherit him in favor of charitable organizations. Christopher made numerous attempts to contact me after the incident, calling, emailing, and even visiting my home to apologize and to beg me to reconsider my decision about his inheritance. But I remained firm in my resolve to direct my wealth toward people who would appreciate its value and its significance. Christopher's wife Stephanie also contacted me to express her shock about the situation and to ask me to consider the impact of my decision on their children, who would lose their grandfather's financial legacy because of their father's poor judgment and social pretensions. I explained to Stephanie that Christopher's behavior reflected values and attitudes that I couldn't support through my estate planning, and that my grandchildren would be better served by learning about hard work and family loyalty than by inheriting money from a grandfather their father was ashamed to acknowledge. Over the following months, I worked with attorneys and financial advisors to establish the Christopher Mitchell Scholarship Foundation and to transfer the majority of my assets into charitable trusts that would provide educational opportunities for working-class families for generations to come. The Scholarship Foundation became operational within 6 months of my announcement at the country club, and it began providing college funding for deserving students whose families demonstrated the values of hard work, integrity, and family loyalty that Christopher had abandoned in his pursuit of social status. Christopher's attempts to reconcile with me continued for over a year, but his efforts were focused primarily on recovering his inheritance, rather than on genuine remorse for his behavior or understanding of the values he had violated through his actions at the country club. I maintained my decision to disinherit Christopher, not out of spite or anger, but because I believed that my wealth should support people who shared my values and who would use their opportunities to build strong families and communities rather than to pursue shallow social status. The publicity surrounding my disinheritance of Christopher and the establishment of the Scholarship Foundation attracted national media attention, with numerous articles and interviews about family values, social class, and the responsibilities that come with inherited wealth. Christopher's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning your roots and rejecting the people who made your success possible, while the Scholarship Foundation became a positive example of how wealth can be used to support worthy causes and deserving families. Today, 3 years after the incident at the country club, Christopher and I have very limited contact, and he has apparently accepted that his inheritance is gone permanently, and that his choices have consequences that can't be undone through apologies or changed behavior. The Christopher Mitchell Scholarship Foundation has provided college funding for over 200 students from working-class families, and the recipients have demonstrated exactly the kind of appreciation and determination that I had hoped to see from my own son. My grandchildren Emily and Michael are now 11 and 9 years old, and they occasionally visit me despite Christopher's continued discomfort with our relationship, apparently curious about their grandfather and the values that motivated my decisions about the family fortune. I hope that my grandchildren will eventually understand the importance of family loyalty and the dangers of judging people based on their economic status or social position, and that they will choose to embrace their working-class heritage rather than to reject it as their father did. The decision to disinherit Christopher was one of the most difficult and painful choices I have ever made, but it was also necessary to maintain my integrity and to ensure that my life's work would support people who shared my values and would use their opportunities responsibly. Christopher's moment of embarrassment about his father cost him $47 million and taught him that social pretensions and family betrayal have consequences that extend far beyond temporary discomfort or awkward conversations. The story serves as a reminder that success and wealth are meaningless if they come at the cost of abandoning your family and rejecting the values that made your achievements possible, and that true character is revealed in how you treat the people who love you and sacrificed for you. If this story about the ultimate price of family betrayal and social pretensions resonated with you, please give this video a like and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about family, values, and consequences. Share your thoughts about this father's decision in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our next recommended story by clicking on the video suggestion.